I tell my story, you could hear a pin drop in the room. People put their smartphones down. They are not looking at any papers. They are looking at me, and they are not doing anything else. And they are not talking to each other either. They are totally focused on. People love stories, and especially with having developed it so that I tell it with the craft that I learned from you. People are spellbound. They love that. I realized early on that it is a shorthand way to begin to create trust, something that I couldn't do as some kind of remote professional. I have to be that real. I have to say, here's my story. I've been here, and I know some of you are here, and yes, we can connect, but it's trust. That's what it is. It's trust.
Thayer Willis grew up rich. She was born into a wealthy family and became, in her own words, an entitled brat. Now, her story is one of self-revelation and transformation. When she hit rock bottom, she knew she needed to do something to turn things around. In this episode, you'll hear how she summoned the courage to confront her pain and find her way to a meaningful life. Her origin story became the catalyst for a successful speaking and consulting business. Welcome to the Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life 20-minute podcast. I'm your host and story coach, Doug Stevenson. In this podcast series, you'll learn how to take your stories from good to great. Through tutorials, interviews, and some really good storytelling, you'll be inspired to take storytelling seriously in order to get serious results, to make your stories stick. Stories that sell you and your product or service. Now, if you feel that you learned something valuable today, please click on the follow or subscribe button. Here's a preview of what you'll learn in this episode. First, how Thayer realized her stories weren't working as well as they should and did something about it. Next, why it took courage for her to get to the heart of her story and how that courage paid off. And finally, how her origin story became the foundational story for every speech and presentation. All right, let's get started.
I'm Thayer Willis, and I work with wealthy families. The way I got to that is that I grew up in a wealthy family, stumbled through my 20s, and kind of looked around and thought there should be somebody available to help with these challenges of wealth that people don't really know much about. And so I determined that nobody was doing that, and I decided to develop that myself. So sometimes I use my therapy training. I've trained as a clinical social worker. That's my license. And so I've used that training to help people in some deeper ways as well. And that's really how I got to where I am. I've also been a professional speaker on these topics, and that brings me to the storytelling, which I learned to improve tremendously with Doug. I did at first tell a sketchy version of my story of origin, how I got into doing this work, because I knew it was important to do that, but I didn't realize how ineffective my story was because I didn't, know how to make it really connect with people. So that was when I worked with Doug and we expanded and worked on my story. He made me do a lot of things that include things that I had wanted to hide, for instance, and it turned into a shorthand way of connecting with audiences.
You said that you mentioned that there were things in your story that you wanted to hide. And of course, as I work with people quite often, I find that they have a deep desire to tell their personal story, but they also have areas of their personal story that they're really uncomfortable with, that they want to hide. And yet That's the essential part of the story. That's the raw, emotional, honest, deep truth of the story. When you learned how to embrace the fact that, these parts that I want to hide are actually essential. They're actually the meat of the story.
Yes.
How did that shift not only the way that you felt, what confidence it gave you to tell your story because you knew it was going to work, but how did it also shift the way it was received?
That's a great question. And I remember like it was yesterday, you pushing me to begin to actually describe and say those things that I had tried to hide. I remember what I said was, as I was telling you my story initially, I said, well, I grew up and I took a lot of things for granted and my parents meant well, but I kind of became a spoiled brat. And then I was able, and you said, wait, what do you mean you became a spoiled brat? And I said, oh, well, I just like took a bunch of things for granted. And I really, and I still tried to get out of telling you. And he said, give me an example. So I reluctantly gave you an example and you said, okay, we're going to use that. And I thought, oh, no, you don't understand. I don't tell anybody this stuff. And you said, yeah, no, that's exactly how we make this story come alive. And I mean, you pushed me sentence by sentence. I didn't want to say more. I didn't want to say the next thing, but I instinctively, fortunately, I trusted you. I instinctively knew that was going to give depth and oomph to my story. And it absolutely was true. So you asked me too about how my story is received. I can't even tell you how many times after I've spoken, someone or more than one person has come up to me and said, thank you for telling your story. That I am so glad you did that because I relate to that. I was like that, or my child is like that. Whatever, that's what they thank me for. Regardless, I mean, my story takes 10 minutes at the beginning of any presentation. And I may be up there talking for an hour. And that's what they thank me for. They thank me for telling my story because it affirms for them that their experience of taking things for granted, of being a brat, of all the things in their family that they've experienced, it affirms, oh, it's not just us. She did this. Went through this too. And it means a lot to people.
What you said, though, about them relating to that and thanking you for it, I want everybody listening to this to hear that. When we are vulnerable and real and honest and tell the raw, deep truth of who we are, really reveal ourselves, it opens the door for them to be emotionally touched and to reveal themselves.
That's true. And that's really the bottom line of telling the story is I realized early on that it is a shorthand way to begin to create trust, something that I couldn't do as some kind of remote professional. I have to be that real. I have to say, look, here's my story. I've been here and I know some of you are here and yes, we can connect, but it's trust. That's what it is. It's trust.
Because you've been able to create this sense of trust and connection, does it not springboard you out into referral after referral after referral? And it just grows in ways that without that story, you wouldn't have been able to achieve that.
That is true. I consider my story that important. You and I actually worked on developing a couple of other stories that have been very helpful. Yet it is that first story, that story of my origin, that is the most powerful and that I use really every time I speak.
Well, that's the thing, though. It's kind of like, I find it interesting when we are telling stories, reading stories to our grandkids and our kids, they want to hear the same story night after night.
They do.
It gives them comfort. It gives them comfort. That's how they're learning. But also it's like, no, I like that part. I like that part. And
yes.
they're just fascinated by the same story over and over. And adults are exactly the same. They hear your story and they go, oh, Thayer, we want to bring you to this other group of people, but we want you to tell that story. We love that story. And even if they've heard it before, they want to hear it again.
Usually people do not mind hearing my story again. I have found that too. And I've offered, especially if I know a group or I know a lot of the people that are going to be in a group, I will say, maybe you want me to not start with my story. And I almost always say, oh no, we do want you to start with your story. Absolutely.
Yeah, that story is money in the bank. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It made all the difference. I guess what I would also like to be able to describe well is that I had enough sense to be telling my story before I ever met you. It was just that I didn't tell it so effectively. I didn't act out parts of it. I didn't include the whole spoiled brat thing. I had a much more sketchy version of it, but I did know that it was important to tell it.
Yeah, I think now at this time in 2022, nobody has to be convinced that story is an effective tool for communication and connection and for building
Yes.
trust and credibility.
Yes.
The challenge is, do you know what you're doing? Do you have craft? Are you
Yeah.
telling a story and it's like, well, wait a minute, that's an okay story, but it's not getting the job done. It's not moving the needle. It's not getting people to change. It's not getting people to say, yes, I want to hire you, or yes, I need to bring you into my organization, or yes, this will change the behavior in my organization to get people to move. So what is it in working with me in the story theater method? We've got the phrase that pays and the 9 steps and the stepping in and the stepping out and, creating scenes rather than just sequence. What of all of that do you feel was most beneficial to shift it for you?
I do have that confidence. And even before I answer your question, I want to tell you that I have come to expect, and I can notice it anytime I think about it, when I tell my story, you could hear a pin drop in the room. People put their smartphones down. They are not looking at any papers. They are looking at me, and they are not doing anything else. And they are not talking to each other either. They are totally focused on. People love stories. And especially with having developed it so that I tell it with the craft that I learned from you, people are spellbound. They love that.
Well, just the effectiveness of the methodology in expanding it from a sketchy story to a full-blown, what I call a mini piece of theater, a story theater story. Does that methodology, those skills, those techniques, do they give you confidence in front of an audience to know it's like, yes, I'm going to show this scene. Yes, I'm going to act out this moment.
Yeah, part of it, and this is why I started with the comment I made about how you could hear a pin drop when I tell my story, is my confidence that I have gathered over seeing that happen over and over and over and over. It always happens. And then the next thing we already touched on, which is the vulnerability, the fact that I am willing to show being a spoiled brat. And of course, people are fascinated with that. I didn't realize that beforehand, before I worked with you. But now I can look back, it all makes sense to me. So the vulnerability, showing me acting badly, and then how I come out of it and talk about how I then got on my feet and have been able to build a meaningful life. Then people, of course, take hope from that. So I do bring it around to giving them hope. And because now they've connected with me, and now they think, well, if she did it, I could do it. Or if she did it, my kid could do it.
If you look at where you thought you were going with your life and going into that versus where you are now and the work you're doing now, story has allowed you to go deeper with more people.
Absolutely, it has. Yes. And just the knowledge I've acquired of how powerful story is. So I've learned a lot about the power of story and how much people like stories.
Can you share with us, either share with us the story or share with us a scene from the story that illustrates what you mean? Is like, well, I was telling a sketchy story and it didn't have this element, but now it has this one thing about me being a brat or whatever, and that's what really gets them.
So yes, when I was growing up and I was in my 20s and I was having trouble married and divorced and being irresponsible and hurtful, and I didn't mean to be doing any of this, but I was just self-centered and thoughtless and didn't know what I was doing. And so, and in and out of relationships a lot. And a friend of mine encouraged me to go up to this place he had been to, program of personal growth, and he thought I would benefit by it. So I went up there, not even really knowing what it was, but I was in enough pain that I just said, okay, when he suggested it. So he drove me up there and dropped me off. And so there I was, I went into class, and very early on, maybe the second or third day, the teacher was giving out jobs. And he got around to me and he said, "You will be cleaning the cabin bathrooms." And I said, "What?" And he said, "You will be cleaning the cabin bathrooms." And I said, "Oh, no, you don't understand. I don't clean bathrooms. Could you give me a different job?" And he said, "No, you will be cleaning the cabin bathrooms." And I said, "No, I won't be doing that." And he walked right up to me and he said, "You are a spoiled brat. You are an ingrate. And until you give up those attitudes and behaviors, you will never have a meaningful life." Well, nobody had ever said anything like that to me before. And I just held myself together as well as I could for the rest of class and ran back to my little cabin and cried. And they kept everybody away from me. I was completely on my own. Even my roommate, they clearly had told her to just slip by and don't talk to me. The next morning, I was sitting outside of my cabin on the step, and the teacher came up and he said, "How are you doing?" And I said, "Not very well." And he said, "Well, are you ready to work?" And I said, "Well," and I hesitated and he started to walk away. And I said, "No, wait. It's just that if I give up who I've been, I don't know who I'll be." And he said, "Right, that's your fear. I know who you'll be. You'll be that beautiful person that's been locked up inside of a spoiled brat all these years." And I said, "Oh, well then, yes, I'm ready to work." And I walked off to class with him.
Now I can see how by sharing the honesty of I was a brat, I was entitled, I was failing in my relationships, I was unhappy. By your ability to go into all of that, everybody listening to you who has similar experiences of bad relationships, they know they're a brat, they know they've been entitled, they relate to all of this, the pain in their own way. They relate to it. Oh, that's me. Oh, that's me too. Clean the bathrooms, really? It just takes them down into this place of, you got to get down on your hands and knees and clean the toilet in order to break through this shit. And we have to share the moments in our life where we cracked.
Yeah.
Open to a new reality for ourselves. So I think what I'm hearing is you have grown in your courage. And the more courageous you are with craft, the more effective you are at helping people to get where you know they need to go.
It was great to gather the confidence that I had more and more to offer to this group that I had originally identified with. And then I began to realize how important it was that I was able to offer some guidance and help them with some, exercises and explorations and things to practice that would help them.
But it all starts with the story. Whether you knew it or not, when you went off to that self-enrichment experience, you knew that there was more within you to experience and to express.
Yes. And also you have talked about you becoming very vulnerable and that enabling you to gather courage and do more with your life. And that was true of me as well. And we can look around and see people who never did gather that courage, never were willing to become vulnerable, and they don't typically get to do as much with their lives.
We got to confront our past in order to move into our future.
Yes. Yeah. So, and it's a privilege. I feel like it's a privilege that I went to that program of personal growth. I didn't even know what it was, but it was clearly a very important stepping stone for me. Then for me to identify this population that I wanted to work with and to be able to figure out how to do it. Then I've been able to improve what I was doing along the way. For instance, when I got the idea of contacting you and developing my story so that I could tell it better, so that I could be more effective, so I could reach people better.
Well, we need guides. You're a guide. I'm a guide. If the people listening to this podcast are wanting to learn about stories so that they can be a guide, a helper, a counselor, a teacher, because that's what speakers are. We're teachers. Now, you know that the story theater method has the 9 steps. It has the phrase that pays.
Uh-huh.
As you've gone through the years, even after working with me, I mean, we worked on that one core story. And we use the 9 steps and the phrase that pays and whatever it is to craft that story in the acting out moments. And so we got that one. But since that time, you've gone off on your own. It's been many, many years since we've worked together personally,
Yeah.
other than, you know, a Zoom call here and there. Do you go back to some of those principles when you have a new story?
Yes, I can recognize moments that I need to act out. And I also tap into messages from that first original story. For instance, you were not given a meaningful life. You were meant to build that for yourself.
What would you say to people who are listening to this and are thinking, okay, that's all well and good. She's got this really powerful personal origin story, and it works well for her with that niche audience. But I work in a high-tech company, or I work in an organization that is very conservative, an insurance company. And yet I want to go in, I've got an opportunity to make a presentation, and it's a meaningful presentation. It's a good opportunity for me to really, you know, stand out, get noticed, because I'm kind of not getting noticed at all. What would you say to them about taking stories seriously?
I'm really glad you asked that, because I have been asked that, and I have also thought of it on my own when interacting with a certain person. And that is that in those situations, like you described, I work for an insurance company, or I work for some, you know, company that, you know, you might think maybe my personal story is not relevant, at least not in the way I have been talking about mine. But I don't agree with that. I actually think that a person can dig deep and start to think back to what led them into the kind of work they actually are doing. I mean, say they are working for an insurance company. How did that even happen? What is there in your life that made this job make sense for you? And now you're wanting to make more of it. Maybe you're wanting to take your work to the next level in this context of this job. What is something in your life that contributed to that?
I agree. I think that's the beauty of this process that I'm hoping to take people through in this Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life podcast, is that if you take story seriously, if you really learn more about story, how to find the right story that makes the right point for the right situation, and then how to take that genesis of a story and craft it, you can make an impact. It can impact you personally. It can drive your career, grow your business, but it can, the reason that we do story is to help people.
Yes. Oh, yes.
I mean, it's about wanting to help, wanting to serve. I believe it's a compassionate service.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so in a way, it's fun. I mean, it's work. Yes. It's also fun to be able to do work that's so constructive.
I think an act of service is always one of the most powerful ways to make a living.
Yes, it's true.
When we're doing an act of service, but it also pays the rent and fulfills us and fulfills them, it's like, well, that's a happy life. That's a fulfilled life.
Yes, I agree.
So Thayer Willis, it's always a pleasure to connect with you and hear the journey that you're on and the success you're having, and how that story has been a springboard for so much of it. You've shown the courage at the beginning to confront yourself and confront the fact that you needed to go to that seminar and get some help. And then you reached out to me and said, now I need the next level. And I'm sure that after me, there have been many other opportunities where you said, I need more skills here, I need more skills there. So thank you for showing the courage to continually self-improve for the benefit of your audience.
Well, I appreciate the fact that any of it has even occurred to me to do. And I certainly appreciate working with you and the step that was, how that pushed me in such a way I would have never done that by myself. I wouldn't have known what to do. So that was a really important turning point. And you're right, I've continued to grow and build on it. And that was just a really important key step.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us today. Thank you for being a guest on the Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life podcast. We all appreciate it. Thanks.
You are welcome. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, that's it for this episode. If you feel that you learned something valuable today, something that you can use that will make you and your business memorable, marketable, and monetizable, there are 3 things I'd like you to do. First, click on the follow or subscribe button. And second, if you're following me on LinkedIn, and I hope you are, please post a comment whenever I post a promo for a new episode of Storytelling That Sticks. And third, please leave a review wherever it is that you're listening to this podcast. And as always, I'd love to hear from you with your questions and comments. Let me know that you're out there listening and learning. And if you'd like me to be a guest on your podcast, please get in touch. Also, if you want help with your stories, speeches, or TED Talks, please get in touch with an email to doug@dougstevenson.com. Hey, thanks for listening. Until the next episode, I'm Doug Stevenson.